It's time for Go Veggie with Kay. Vegetarian cooking for your good health. Now, here's Kay Stepkin.
Hello, and welcome to Go Veggie with Kay. I'm Kay Stepkin, and once again we're here at Whole Foods Market in Evanston. Today's show is lentil loaf and mashed potatoes. Our main dish will be a lentil loaf, created using a little bean that packs 25% protein. Our special version of mashed could be mistaken for the real thing, but the main ingredients are cauliflower and a grain called millet, both high in fiber and rich in nutrients. And for dessert, it'll be brownies, using a special recipe that will yield moist, flat cookies or a pan full of little squares. It's up to you. We'll take time, too, to talk with a leading Chicago holistic physician and a friend of mine, Dr. David Edelberg. He's the author of the Triple Whammy Cure, and he'll tell us how eating well can help our mood as well as our health. Well, let's stop all this loafing around and get cooking. Our hearty lentil loaf coming up. I have preheated this pan, added water, onions, and some fresh garlic. We're going to do a water saute. Next, I'm going to add carrots and chopped celery. A water saute is a great way to limit the amount of fat in a recipe. The lentils need to be picked through and washed, which I did already, and I cooked them in double the amount of water. I had 2 cups of lentils, cooked it in 4 cups of water for about 20 minutes. Gonna move the lentils to the bowl. For the lentil loaf, we're gonna mash the lentils with some liquids and the brown rice. I also cooked the brown rice in double the amount of water. I used short brown rice for this recipe. Short rice has more starch in it than the long grain rice, and so it cooks up a little stickier, which will be nice since we're not using eggs in this recipe. I cooked the rice for about 35 minutes. I'm going to mash the rice and the lentils with some of the lentil cooking water. This will help it all stick together. Add some magic ingredients to this lentil loaf. Sesame tahini. What is tahini? Well, think peanut butter, only it's made with sesame seeds. Tahini, ground sesame seeds, is one of the better fats as it comes from a whole food rather than extracting the oil out of the food. When we extract oil out of the food, that oil gets rancid very, very quickly. A little bit of soy sauce. I think I will whisk this. And then add some water that the lentils were cooking in. Lentils are available in a great variety of colors. Brown, orange, green. I've even seen black lentils. And different ethnic recipes tend to use different types of lentils. This was one of the first crops domesticated in the Near East. Lentils actually have 25% protein. It's the highest protein of any plant food aside from the soybean. But they have the added advantage of cooking very quickly. You can store dried lentils in an airtight container, and I'd keep it at room temperature, not refrigerated. In general, I would avoid overcooking lentils as they can quickly turn mushy. But in our case, we want them a little mushy because this is going to help hold the loaf together without eggs. And of course, you can also use canned lentils. I'm going to whisk some of the lentil cooking water into the tahini and tamari. Then we're going to add this to our lentil and rice dish. Then we're going to add some spices to our vegetable saute. I put in some fresh parsley and some fresh sage. And we will stir this into our lentils and rice. Since everything is already cooked, this smells so wonderful. You could actually even eat it now and it would taste good, but we are going to bake it into 2 loaves. I hate to make just 1 loaf because it's so tasty. You always want more, if not that night, then the next day. I'm also going to add a little bit of black pepper. Going to add the breadcrumbs. Now these are dried breadcrumbs, not soft ones, because if you think about it, the dried ones will absorb a lot more liquid than soft breadcrumbs. So if all you have in the house is bread, I would just process them in a food processor, grind them up, and put them on a cookie sheet and put them in the oven for about 5 minutes until they dry up or dry out. So I'm getting all the breadcrumbs in here. Of course, I use whole wheat breadcrumbs. To determine if there is enough breadcrumbs in your meatballs, or in our case, lentil loaf, get your fingers a little bit wet. Put a small amount in your hand and form it into a ball. If your ball holds together, which ours does, then you have the right amount of breadcrumbs in it. I'm going to spray our glass bread pans with a spray olive oil, and then really try to pack the mixture into the pans. We are going to bake these 2 loaves at 350 for 35 to 40 minutes. I just have to be sure that it feels firm. Again, since there's no eggs in here, we want to make sure that it holds together as we're baking it. So these will go in the 350 oven. Here's our lentil loaves. Red peppers are great in a special sauce that we're going to make to be served on top of our lentil loaf. Somebody asked me once, why do I only see red pepper sauce? Why not green pepper sauce? Well, green peppers are often too thin to roast them. Generally, red peppers are roasted for a sauce. You could roast them directly on top of an open flame. However, I find that oven roasting the peppers keeps them sweeter. And here's how you do it. You cut off the top, slice the pepper in half lengthwise, remove the seeds and the veins. These peppers are then going to get flattened to go on top of this cookie sheet. Now I have roasted our red peppers in advance. What I did was oil the cookie sheet, cut all my peppers, 6 of them, flatten the pepper on top of the oiled cookie sheet, brush the top with oil, and then I roasted these at 400 degrees for about 20 minutes. I then removed them. They get a little bit, they get a few little splotches of black, but mostly the skin just wrinkles. When you take them off of the cookie sheet, you can put them in a sort of a smallish bowl, pile them on top of each other, cover them with a plate, and let them sit for about 20 minutes. That steaming will soften and loosen the skin, which can then be peeled right off, which I have done with these red peppers. Don't forget to make use of the tops of the peppers that you've cut off, because these probably will have cost you $5 or $6 a pound. You also roast the garlic that is going to go in this recipe. You take a whole head of garlic and just rub off the outer papery skins, leaving the cloves encased in that last very thin skin. You oil a baking dish, set the whole head of garlic upright in the dish, drizzle a little more olive oil on top, then add a few tablespoons of water to the bottom of the dish. You then can cover it with a little bit of tin foil. The foil I use, as some of you know, is always lined with paper, so no foil ever touches the food. This will go in the same 400-degree oven as the peppers. The peppers you'll take out in 20 minutes. When you take them out, you then lower the temperature to 350, uncover your garlic, and bake it for another 20 minutes until it's completely soft inside. That is all of the pre-work that you have to do for this wonderful red pepper sauce. Now we're going to put it all in this blender. I'm going to start with the olive oil at the bottom where the blade is. Going to add fresh basil, 1/4 cup. Oh, I just love how fresh basil smells. Going to add the roasted red peppers, a little bit of sea salt. And then when I work with garlic or onions, I always wear gloves. At home, in fact, I even wear the heavy yellow rubber gloves that I use to wash dishes, just because I don't like to get this on my hands. Take the cloves, keep the pointed end up, and you're just going to squeeze all of this soft garlic right into the sauce. You can see that it's messy, and that's why the gloves are very, very nice. I'm just going to peel that right off and turn on my blender. That is one pretty sauce. And this will be served right over our lentil loaves. It's wonderful over most any vegetable dish and most any grain. A red pepper sauce. Now we're going to make the cauliflower millet unpotatoes. I cooked the cauliflower in just a couple tablespoons of water with salt and some caraway seeds until they were soft, just about 15 minutes. Then I cooked 1/2 cup of millet in 1 cup of water, exactly double the water to the millet. I put them all in the pot, covered it, put the lid on the pot. When the water started boiling, I lowered the heat and cooked it until all the liquid was absorbed, also 15 minutes. So the cauliflower and the millet cooked in the same amount of time. I drained the cauliflower, going to put it in the food processor along with the millet. Now, millet is one of the oldest foods known to humans, and it's possibly the very first cereal grain that was used for domestic purposes. Today, however, millet is a very little-known grain, but it's delicious. It has a very distinctive taste, and it cooks in only 15 minutes, like I said. I am going to heat up, well, let's measure this cauliflower cooking water. I'm going to add enough soy milk to it to equal a total of 1 cup of liquid. And that we will heat up. Put the lid on so it heats a little bit faster. And let's start to process this. Looking good. I'm going to add the margarine, the non-hydrogenated margarine, to the soy milk and cauliflower water mixture. And we're just going to wind up adding all that at once. I actually added a little more than double the water to the millet. It makes it cook up a little gummy, a little moister and denser. And I did that on purpose to give this a mashed potato type texture. When I cook millet up for a main dish, I use less water than double, so then it cooks up light and fluffy. See how this is heating up. This margarine is almost melted. And then we will pour it in. While that's heating, I would just like to show you how to cut the cauliflower. You get the whole head of cauliflower in, you wash it, turn it over, cut it right through the middle. And you can see that there is a core on each side. Just take your knife make sort of a V shape just to get that entire core out. And after you take that out, it's really easy to take out the rest of the leaves. You could then pull it apart where it's easy to pull it apart into these little florets. Cut off some more of the core when necessary, just to get it all out. That is how I prep the cauliflower before I steamed it. Okay, good. This is melted. And I think I will pour this from a measuring cup. Until it gets a mashed unpotato consistency. Looking good. I'm going to add the rest of the millet. And the rest or most of the milk mixture. Let's see how this is. Notice I didn't dump all of the liquid in at once because we want it to have a mashed potato consistency, which it now has. I'm just going to put in a few turns of the fresh pepper. And one of my favorite kitchen gadgets is a nutmeg grinder. And just put in a few turns of fresh nutmeg. You don't really need any reason to love this recipe. It stands on its own for health and for great taste. But in case you can't eat potatoes, perhaps the glycemic index is too high for you, then here is a great alternative. This dish ranks very low on the glycemic scale, and that means that these vegetables do not cause the hunger-inducing spike in blood sugar levels that's associated with potatoes. Here is our cauliflower millet unpotatoes. You're going to love them. We have as our guest today Dr. David Edelberg. He's the medical director of Whole Health Chicago on Lincoln Avenue on Chicago's north side. He has just published the Triple Whammy Cure. It's a book about women who feel awful much of the time.
Triple whammy is a name that I gave to a condition that affects tens of millions of women who basically feel crummy a lot of the time. Tired, achy, depressed, digestive complaints, kind of brain fog, and yet they go from doctor to doctor and are told endlessly, your tests are fine, there's nothing really wrong with you. Well, there's actually something wrong. What's wrong is that there's an imbalance in their bodies. Whammy number one is a brain chemical called serotonin. And serotonin acts as a buffer against stress. Unfortunately, women have only a third of the amount of serotonin that men have. So women are biochemically much more vulnerable to stress. Second whammy is stress itself. Women simply are under much more day-to-day stress than are men. They're responsible for their families, they have jobs, they're endlessly volunteering for something. Women don't know how to say no. The pronunciation is lost on them. The third whammy is the effect of their hormone estrogen. You have to picture the relationship between estrogen and serotonin like two cars of a two-car roller coaster, estrogen yanking serotonin up and down, so that when estrogen falls, like during PMS days, it pulls down serotonin. Down comes the stress buffer, and there you have the emotional vulnerability of PMS. So the whammies are low serotonin, stress, and the effect of estrogen. This produces a bunch of disorders that are called triple whammy disorders. These include depression, anxiety, panic, obsessive thinking, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, irritable bowel, headaches, and even jaw grinding, TMJ. To raise serotonin, conventional doctors might use Prozac that has all sorts of side effects, or Zoloft, but you can actually do it quite nicely with the herb St. John's wort, the amino acid 5-hydroxytryptophan, B complex, and then a high-carb diet, mainly vegetarian, whole grain, fruit, veggies, and legumes. This is why they're called comfort foods. They raise the serotonin and act as a natural tranquilizer.
What exactly is the difference between a disorder and a disease?
That's a great question, Kay. The problem is the disease actually causes physical changes in the body. Positive tests, positive x-rays. Doctors know how to diagnose and treat disease. A disorder, also called a syndrome, doesn't produce any positive tests. It produces symptoms that can drive a woman crazy, but also no real tests in her body ever become positive.
Dr. Edelberg is always interesting. He has so many good ideas to help us combat stress and feel our best. A delicious brownie cookie can make us feel mighty good, too. We're going to make these cookies in 2 bowls, like I usually do. We'll have a bowl with dry ingredients, a bowl with wet ingredients. Why are they called brownie cookies? Well, you can make them either way. We're going to scoop them out as cookies today, but if you like, you can just put them in a square 8-inch pan and bake them, and you have brownies. What I like about the cookies is you don't feel compelled to put a rich frosting on it, and they taste just as good. We're going to start with tofu, which I have already put in our food processor, so it's soft. Going to add non-hydrogenated margarine to the tofu. And because the tofu is soft, it has the added factor of keeping the brownies soft, which is nice. Just going to mix that together. Now, I have used the fresh, refrigerated type tofu that will spoil. I like food that spoils. It means it's alive to start with. That takes a little bit longer in the blender, though, than if you use the tofu that you buy aseptically packaged off the shelf. Now, the maple syrup. Put that to the side. And vanilla. So I just want to whip that up a little bit. And now our dry ingredients. Whole wheat pastry flour, cocoa. Be sure when you buy the cocoa that it's just pure cocoa powder. You don't want cocoa for the drink because that usually has dry milk powder and sugar added. Chocolate chips. You can buy chocolate chips sweetened with barley malt. Instead of sugar, you can buy chocolate chips that are organic, and some sea salt. So I will mix the dry. And just pour it right into the wet ingredients. Stir it as little as possible. You do not want to develop the gluten. You just want to dampen all of the ingredients. I much prefer using maple syrup to sugar because it has various nutrients in it that have not been processed out. A lot of trace minerals. I also use grade B maple syrup. I never buy the grade A. It sounds better, grade A, and you look at it on the shelf and it's lighter in color. But actually the grade B maple syrup is less refined and more packed with trace minerals than the grade A. It also has a much stronger maple flavor. There used to be grade C, but I have not seen that in the stores for many years now. Just going to scoop these cookies out. This recipe should make about 10 cookies. We shall see. It's good to try to get them all about the same size because then they cook in the exact same amount of time. There's 6, 7. Looks like we are going to get 8 cookies out of this recipe. Let's just get it all out here. 8. I am going to barely press these down. I just use my finger in the back of the spoon because we want them to stay sort of thick and they'll be more brownie-like that way and stay softer. These cookies will bake at 350 degrees for 13 or 14 minutes. If you chose to take that same batter and put them in an 8-inch square brownie pan, they would bake also at 350 degrees, but for 30 minutes. It's been great being with you. Today we made lentil loaf with cauliflower and millet mashed potatoes. You know what? I think I'm going to add some sauce to this lentil loaf also. Just looks so pretty and, of course, tastes wonderful. This is a perfect meal for a winter's day or anytime you're hungry for an especially filling and satisfying meal. And, of course, we also baked up a year-round favorite, brownies made with good-for-you tofu and sweeteners. I hope these dishes will become regular mealtime favorites, whether you're a longtime vegetarian or whether you are just beginning to try new ways of eating without meat. Here's hoping that you'll enjoy your increased energy and well-being as you go veggie. Until next time, I'm Kay Stepkin.